All right. Hey, everybody. My name is David Nickel with Solar Washington. And it looks like we picked out just about the right number of chairs. I wasn't entirely sure about that, but I think we made this work. So first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors. I'm really glad that was up there. I didn't actually turn to look, but they are the ones that actually allow us to put these meetings on and give us the funding we need to continue doing this kind of stuff. So I feel like this has become tradition at this point. I need to announce that we are going to be meeting at the Finney Market Pub afterwards. So it's just up the street. It's pretty much within walking distance, but I hope to see you there. And I also wanted to bring up, oh, I was like, what the hell is he doing? There we go. Maybe not. Nope. It's never had this problem before. There. The sound works. Yeah, we know that. All right. So we have a couple people that are going to be rotating off of our board here in the new year, and so we are looking for new board members. So if you are interested in running for the board for Solar Washington, please just go ahead and submit us an application, basically just a statement with why you would like to be on the board, just a little bit of information about you. And we'll go ahead and put it out for general vote, and then after we refine the choices, the board will vote on who out of those refined choices gets to be on the board. But we are looking for, I believe, 2 people at this point. So at the end of this meeting, we are intending to put up on the board our preliminary results for the survey we just recently put out for all the solar companies in Washington State. We have some pretty good results so far, but these are preliminary results, so that's my caveat right now. We're still trying to figure out how to best express them, but that will be coming up. And then first up, we have Jeremy Smithson. He's going to give us an SIW update. And then we have Almaz. She's with the Renewable Energy Analysis Lab from the University of Washington, and she's going to give us a presentation on the value of the solar tariff and will it work in Washington State. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah. So, just going to give you a little bit of an update of what we've been up to with solar installers of Washington. We're actually, it's actually getting kind of crowded what we're doing because we got so many processes going. But we are definitely in motion along with the other processes. Next slide. But it remains to be seen where we're going. I guess that yellow didn't turn out too well. Next slide. So there's really kind of one group of stakeholders that keeps meeting over and over again in these different processes. But there are 3 separate processes going on at the same time. Representative Jeff Morris is picking up where he left off, more or less, from the last session. And those of you who know Jeff know that he's always got new ideas, and so he is certainly presenting those new ideas and kind of continuing with the bills that he sponsored last session, but we're not exactly sure what form that's going to take yet. Solar Installers of Washington have we drafted a bill a few months ago, and then we've been collecting feedback from various stakeholders and having discussions in our group, and we're pretty close to having a bill. We're actually having the language drafted, and we should have something in the next week or so. And then the governor's executive order fingered Washington State University to study the existing program and meet with stakeholders and come up with suggestions for a new program. So those are the 3 main processes, but I would say the good thing about having so many meetings and processes is that we are talking to the same people over and over again and really getting a good idea of what the other people want, and they're getting a good idea of what we want, and we are finding common ground. Next slide. So we've had 120 or so meetings if you include our board meetings, and we are really identifying, the points at which we can agree with other stakeholders. Some of the ideas that are coming forth, creating a fixed term for each participant in the incentive program. If you're familiar with the program we have now, the incentive payments stop on the same date for everybody, June 30th, 2020. It's pretty well agreed among all the stakeholders that it's better if each participant has a fixed period that's the same, and that's ranging in discussions from 8 years to 12 years, but everybody would have the same amount of time in the program. We're looking at reducing the gap between in-state and out-of-state incentive rates. The reason for that is to try to get more scale happening. We love our manufacturers in the state, but there's been a bit of a constraint there, and so in order to get to the governor's goals and some of the environmental groups' goals in terms of how much solar we can install in the state, it seems important that we have an incentive that is a little bit less weighted toward the in-state products. We'd like to see projects on leased buildings to be eligible for the incentive. For instance, a lot of businesses lease their facilities. They might have a 5 or a 10-year lease, and any business owner that wants to do solar is going to do the calculation whether or not that would be cost effective within the term of the lease that they have on their building, and we think that's a great way to get more commercial solar out there. One of the ideas that came up recently is to expire the sales tax waiver, and that would create funding for the program. And I'm not sure why we didn't think of this. I think it's because we were so happy a couple of years ago to have the sales tax waiver extended. But I personally went through a thought process before that sales tax waiver extended, where I was kind of freaked out at first. It's like, oh my God, what are we going to do without this? And then after a while, I realized that the costs of equipment had come down a lot more than the 9.5% that we were talking about losing. And so after modeling it a little bit, it looked like, well, you could really absorb that, as the costs come down, and still have, still have a viable incentive program. If the sales tax waiver is ended, then that front loads the funding for the program. It really kind of makes it work out very nicely, so that money is coming into the state coffers from the sales tax and then is trickling back out in the form of the incentive. And I think if we can show that it's somehow revenue neutral, or approaching that point, that this will be a great way to sell it to the legislature. So we'll see how that goes. That's just now being discussed as a result of the WSU group that's being led by Representative Jake Fye. Community solar, there would be a different form of that as in most of the proposals that are out there, there's a value to it. We want to see community solar actually do what it's supposed to do, which is to provide a way for people who maybe live in an apartment or are buried in the trees, or don't have a lot, the wherewithal to put on a whole system. Community solar gives them a way to buy in to a project and actually be producing solar energy. Limited participation by third-party owners. This is a really touchy subject, but we think there's a way to do it, and so those discussions are ongoing. The rates would step down either over time, on a calendar date, or another proposal is to have those rates step down as certain capacity benchmarks are reached. And both of those methods have their pros and cons, but we're discussing that now. We would have enhanced consumer protection through disclosure of details about projects. This really has come about because leased projects have been shown to not really, the people who lease solar don't really know too much about the lease that they just signed. There's an interesting study that came out this summer, and it was kind of appalling what little people actually knew about the agreement that's just signed and the equipment that's on their roof and so forth. So we thought that it was important to have some method of consumer protection through disclosure of what the consumer is actually getting, either through a purchase or through a lease. And the utilities are all, well, not all of them, but quite a few of them would like to participate in the incentive. Since our utility friends are probably our most powerful allies in this process, we are trying to figure out how that could work out, how to make that work. And also we're trying to create a commercial project incentive so that right now there's a real disincentive for larger systems because of the annual payment cap in the program. And we're looking at creating an incentive that would allow for larger annual payments, but at a reduced rate, and to see if that is a good incentive for commercial projects. And there are a few other things, but this is just the things I could think of to jot down. Next slide. So the next steps, we're continuing with Representative Morris's process. He's forming work groups, and so we'll be participating in those. We'll be completing our bill and have it in the actual bill language so that we can begin to shop that around to the various legislators. And outreach to legislators is the next step for our group, and then to constituents. So as we go through the rest of the year, that's our big push, is to really get the word out to our legislators that, hey, we exist, and we're trying to get more solar installed in the state, and we think it's a good thing for the economy, also for the environment, and we're looking for support from our legislators. The WSU process, the governor's process, is going to be concluded, and then there will be something coming out of that. We're assuming that it'll be a bill. Maybe it's one that Representative Fye is going to sponsor, or we don't know. But everything is kind of coming to the end of the year where everything has to be in place for the session starting in January. So we will try to keep some current information on our website. Right now, if you go to solarinstallers.wa.org and go to the news section, it's a little stale. I think our last post there is from May or something, or maybe it's July. But we'll try to get updated information there so that if you are wanting to know what's happening, you'll be able to get that information on our website. And in case you don't know what the website URL is, there it is for you. So that's all I've got. I don't know if there are any questions I can answer, or yes, sir.
Now, Inslee and other congressmen and legislators also proposed and passed that we have 15% alternative energy. How does this fit into the formula for 15% alternative energy And some people have said, well, don't we count our dams and water energy, but most people don't include the dams. They just talk about wind and solar and other alternative energy, and how are we doing that way against the 15% that they had projected that they wanted that much production in the state.
So if you're talking about I-937, that's really for the utilities to produce that new renewable energy. And if their customers are doing it, there's a disconnect there. There is a way for utilities to get those renewable energy credits from their customers, but as our current program is now, anybody who's participating in it retains the renewable energy credits of their system, so it does not count toward the I-937 goals.
One of the comments is Puget Sound Energy had a surplus a few years back of renewable energy credits, and they were actually selling some of those. So there isn't necessarily an incentive for utilities to buy them from consumers that install it on the rooftop, because in some cases, some utilities have surpluses.
Yeah, there are quite a few utilities that have met their goals, or at least they're current with their goals, so they're not particularly motivated by that. One utility that does get the RECs from their customers is Snohomish PUD. If you participate in the Solar Express program and get the incentives from that, then they get your renewable energy credits, and they are using those. But it's an interesting situation that we're in. You know, quite a few of our utilities are what they call long utilities. They produce more power than they're actually needing on a day-to-day basis. Tacoma, Seattle, and so forth, and so they are actually selling power. So I'm not sure how the I-937 goals fit into this, because there is that disconnect between customer-generated renewable energy and you know, there are other goals now that are starting to arise. You've got mandates. You've got the EPA. You know, 111D, which is their you know, mandate to utilities to cut down on carbon emissions. The governor is looking at various ways to cut down on carbon emissions. But in our state, most of our carbon emissions come from transportation. So it is a little bit of a dilemma for us on the solar side to make the case, since we're surrounded by you know, all this hydro. Now, as far as I know, with the I-937 goals, retrofits that improve the efficiency of hydroelectric facilities can count. But if you watch the legislature, every year there's somebody sponsoring a bill that would count all of our hydro as renewable energy toward the I-937 goals, and those bills have yet to pass. But there's one that comes up every year in that regard. Okay, I don't know if I can take up more time, but okay, yes.
You know, like in Shoreline, we have a Shoreline Solar Board, and we put on solar panels on schools, and that gave incentive to a lot of parents then to go ahead and put solar panels on. And we have solar panels on City Hall.
Yeah.
And if we provided more money, they did have a program for government buildings to get solar panels. It gives a good incentive then to a lot of the residents to go ahead and put solar panels on their homes.
Yeah.
So if we had more grants or programs that would put solar panels onto the public buildings, I think you'd have a lot more residential requests.
Yeah, it's true that just the proximity to solar installations is a big factor in motivating people to do it themselves. I've noticed that just around my house there are seven neighbors that have put on solar because they come to our house on the tour and they're like, oh, you guys did it, we can do it too. And the Solarize programs that Northwest Seed has been facilitating, same thing. You know, it's once it starts happening and you see it happening, then it really gets in people's consciousness. So if you have it in public places, schools, you know, city halls, you know, they have it here now on the PNA and it's on the zoo, and you know, City Light is continuing with their community solar program. The ones that are the projects that are visible are definitely, you know, a factor in helping people to make that decision. Any other? Yes, Jack.
When you said that community solar was going to be different, how so?
It's probably going to be more. Well, if you're familiar with what we have now, you can form a company, and you know, your group of investors can purchase a project and place it on a host site. But those projects turned out to be very tricky to do for legal reasons, you know, liability, et cetera, and also for the Securities and Exchange Commission has rules that come into play. And most of them have been very complicated or end up being just like a few wealthy people putting their money together and creating a project. Contrast that with the utility-owned community solar projects, and those projects are much more in the model of the whole idea of community solar projects in the first place, which was to allow people to buy into a project where they might not ordinarily be able to do it. And to be honest, our group was like ready to just drop community solar altogether because it was so problematic. But the utilities have been insistent on keeping a community solar project or a program going, and it's really going to be you know, in that mold rather than the company-owned type. But we'll see. You know, we don't have anything. You know, we don't have a bill yet, and the bill hasn't been through any processes. So if you're not familiar with the process, you get a legislator to sponsor your bill. Then it has to go through, in our case, the Energy Committee in whichever house the bill is being sponsored. Then it has to go through a fiscal committee, Ways and Means, and then it has to go to the Rules Committee, where it's decided whether or not it actually gets to the floor to be voted on by the whole, either the Senate or the House, depending on where the bill is originated. If it gets that far and gets passed, then it has to go through the whole process again in the opposite house. And at the end of that process, and now remember, along the way, it can be amended. It can be amended, in committee. It can be amended on the floor. Representative Morris' favorite method is to do a striker amendment on the floor. He'll come in with something that says, just save the enacting clause, and everything else is going to be replaced by this. And usually what this is pretty much the bill as it was, but with some other changes in it. That's his favorite method. So a lot of stuff can happen, and good or bad. Our original program, we watched it start out as a 10-year program, and then I can't remember if it was in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. It got chopped down to 5 years, just arbitrarily. Somebody said, hey, why should it be 10 years? Let's make it 5 years. Amended it to 5 years. And of course we were appalled, And it got amended again on the floor, I believe, but they got the date wrong, and so instead of going back to 10 years, it became a 9-year program. So this is what happens to your bill. You know, it just kind of goes through this process, and you try to influence it as best you can, but you never know. You never know what's going to happen. One more.
Thanks for bringing up the point about community solar. I was curious too, because with all these different vectors coming into the program with WSU and the governor and Jeff Morris, these political bodies, I think that they'd really like to see participation of the people, and community solar offers an avenue to that, where you get the contact info and you get the community meetings, and this is where the relationship between solar and constituents, like it says up there on the slide, comes into play. And one way that that community solar can play a role in getting non-homeowners to understand and be, a participant in solar and its adaptations. So if the community solar program is changed right now, you say, legally, maybe there's some challenges for people in the private sector to do it on their own. And then the public sector, or at least the utility, they have their own program. They're not going to give you maybe the names and addresses of the people who are in this program to be, advocates for solar in Washington State. But maybe if Northwest Seed or SIW or even Solar Washington, if there's a way to have a community solar project and have people buy in, independent of the utility, independent of, well, there had to be some investor, but I haven't worked all out in my mind, but a way to secure the names and addresses of people who are interested in solar in the community, have them be investors in solar, beholden to it emotionally and financially, and then they can go down to Olympia or they can stand up in their local meetings. There'd just be more of them that can take advantage of this than people who own their solar system on their home, on their business. Do you know what I mean, Nina?
Yeah,
So
and there are actually some people that are coming to the meetings who are representing groups that want to do community solar projects. So, but it's kind of a vexing problem. I mean, half of Seattle rents, so and we get that call quite often. Hey, I'm in an apartment. Can I do solar? Now we can send them to City Light and say, yeah, there's a program open. Go sign up. And it's that easy. It's much more difficult to do the investor-owned type. And my eyes cross when I start thinking about it. So it should be an easy process for people to participate in if it's going to be widely adopted. That's kind of the way I look at it. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that even at this late date, suggestions are welcome. So, if anybody has ideas in that regard, tell us. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, before our next presenter, this seemed like a really good opportunity to throw up the data that we have been surveying the solar businesses in Washington State for. It seemed like a really good segue, so we're just going to put this up really quick. Can everybody see that / read it? Okay. This is our preliminary findings. Yeah, I think there we go. Beautiful. I'm just going to give you a minute to read. I'll wait till I see people not reading. No, this is, so, no. To give you a bit of background on the survey, we basically assembled all of the businesses in Washington State that are involved with solar in one way or the other. So typically that means manufacturers, installers, companies that might perform maintenance on solar, and we sent out an anonymous survey to all of them, and several times, and we followed up with phone calls and all that kind of stuff, and we ended up getting back 34% response rate. And so we've taken that data, and we're just now trying to figure out how to present it in a useful fashion. So we initially did this survey at the behest of, at the request, of Senator Marilyn Chase, and so we're trying to find more ways to make this data useful. So we are willing to share this data. We're not we're essentially willing to open this data up to anybody who wants to see it. So, but this is what we've come up with so far. So I just wanted to throw it out there. Now the next presenter is Almaz from the Renewable Energy Analysis Lab with the University of Washington. And she's going to be presenting on the value of the solar tariff and if it will work in Washington State.
I have to use the mic. Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Almaz. I'm with the Renewable Energy Analysis Lab. I'm a graduate student in the Electrical Engineering Department, and I'm also with the Clean Energy Institute. I'm a fellow of the Clean Energy Institute. So my research at the University of Washington looks at the value of distributed energy resources, and included in that is demand response and distributed generation. And in particular, I'm looking at distributed solar. So I started getting into solar about the middle of this year, and because my research looks at the value of these resources, I'm essentially looking at how much should we actually pay distributed resources that's fair and sustainable. So we can come up with incentives all day long, and they have their purpose and their value. But what's a way that we can sustainably pay these resources? So that's what my research looks at. And so that's what got me to looking at the value of solar. So I don't have to tell a room of solar enthusiasts what net energy metering is, but I will anyway. So if you can, and I have to apologize to you because I didn't know that I wasn't going to have like a clicker or something, so your finger's going to get some exercise. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of animations, and so I'm going to be like, click, yeah. So anyway, this is what we're going to talk about. First, I'm going to go over a little bit about net energy metering, because we can't talk about the value of solar without first looking at net energy metering. And once we get into net energy metering, I'm going to tell you a couple of methodologies that exist right now. So for those of you who might not be aware, net energy metering obviously is a policy. And earlier this year, actually I believe it was about April, the state of Minnesota adopted a new policy called value of solar tariffs. Essentially, utilities have the option to pay their residential customers the retail rate, obviously, through net energy metering, or they can pay them through the value of solar. So it's an option of what solar will get for the excess fed back to the grid, or for all of the energy fed back to the grid. So net energy metering, how does that value solar? Because my whole talk today is going to be about how we can put a price tag on solar. So first we have to look at how net energy metering does that right now. So with net energy metering, it doesn't matter what time of day you're at home using or whatever, what time you're producing. It doesn't matter which way the electrons are going, if they're going this way or that way. There's a single price. And so if you can go to the next animation, essentially what you're saying is that electricity produced by PV panels is equal to electricity produced by the grid. They are equal. It doesn't matter which way it's going. Just wonder, how many of you think that's fair? That makes sense? It doesn't matter if the electron is going this way, out of the house or into the house. It's the same electron. It should be priced the same. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So you can skip to the next slide. Yep. Again. So why is net energy metering an issue? There was a study that was put out by Edison Electric Institute last year that looks at why net energy metering and all of these policies might be an issue. Could you click to the next one. And so we have, they call this the vicious cycle from disruptive forces, and solar is considered a disruptive force. Why? Because distributed energy resources and energy efficiency in of itself has one purpose, and that's to reduce how much you use. If you reduce how much you use, you reduce how much you buy, so the utility loses revenue. So if the utility loses revenue, and there are capital-intensive businesses, they have to collect revenue, a sufficient amount of revenue. The only thing that they can do is then raise rates. So the rates raise, and then customers see their bills going up, and they think, I need to reduce my consumption, or maybe I should install solar. And so the process begins, and they're saying because net energy metering allows you to recover all of your retail rate, but the utilities costs don't, reduce proportionally, they're actually losing in the end. So you might be tempted to blame solar for that, but if you click a couple of times, in fact, the root cause of this is the retail rate is itself poorly designed. So you've got the utility with fixed costs, variable costs, and they're recovering that from you through just a variable rate. And so simple math will tell you that's not going to work. Eventually, if you don't use enough, the utility won't make enough money to cover its costs. And so as we move to this smarter grid, having more distributed energy resources, rates are going to have to change. That's one thing, which is a total another aspect of my research. But right now I'm looking at what the price for solar is. So this is so much of an issue that there was a study done out of Lawrence Berkeley, if you can go to the next one, that looked exactly at what is the financial impact of having solar or other distributed energy resources. They looked at that impact in terms of the utilities' return on equity, the shareholders' earning potential, and also the retail rate. Remember, I told you that was part of the cycle, that the retail rates would go up. And they looked at it for two different penetration levels of solar, when solar is 2.5% or 10% of the total load. And they looked at two prototypical utilities, one in the Southwest, one in the Northeast. And what they found is, so 10% probably is a super high number that we're probably not going to reach anytime soon, but just looking at the 2.5%, what you can see is that the retail rate doesn't really increase very much. However, the shareholders' earnings reduce enough to make them actually want to say something. And the same with the utilities' return on equity. And so this is obviously causing some stir, and people are starting to say stuff about, if you go to the next slide, people are starting to complain about net energy metering, so much so that there are now 22 states with legislation either under consideration or already approved to alter or completely eliminate net energy metering altogether. So that's the climate that solar is in right now. And by far, the biggest request that the utilities are asking for is just to be able to tack on a surcharge to the solar customers. So they want to be able to, I know, for example, Arizona wanted to give like a $50 to $99, depending on how big your solar panel was, fixed surcharge on your bill every month, because they're not going to be able to collect their revenue from you. If you net meter till you have absolutely nothing on your bill, you're paying zero, but you still are using the grid. And so, of course, 3 pieces of legislation failed recently in Washington, but there's still an issue. So that was another reason why I wanted to look at what about Washington State, what the value of solar is. So to sort of sum things up, people who are on the we don't need net energy metering side say, for one, it allows PV customers to avoid their costs. So you're using the grid, whether you're feeding in or taking from, you're using that infrastructure. And if net metering gives you an opportunity to bring your bill all the way down to zero, then that's not fair. So they're saying that's not fair because eventually what it means is somebody else is paying for the grid for you. So no cost shifting should be allowed. So people who are for net energy metering say that the environmental and the societal benefit, what you just told us right now, the economic benefits of solar far outweigh the net energy, a little bit of net energy metering premium that you pay. And so because of this debate, there is now this value of solar where they say, okay, we're going to actually settle the dispute. We'll look at all of the different benefits that you say solar provides. We'll quantify all of the economic value of all of those benefits, and we'll create a value of solar tariff. So you'll be compensated for the value that you as a solar resource bring to the utility, not as the utility is valued to bring electricity to you, which is what net energy metering does. So we can continue. So that brings us to the value of solar. And yeah, we can go on. What's different between the value of solar and net energy metering? Value of solar, and probably some of you are going to think feed-in tariff when you see this, but you have to, all of your consumption you have to buy from the utility at the retail rate, and all the production from your panel you have to sell at the value of solar tariff. And those two can be different. They don't necessarily have to be equal. So from a solar owner's perspective, you probably wouldn't be very happy with this unless, if you were given the option, you wouldn't be very happy with the value of solar tariff if it were lower than the retail rate. But this is essentially the way it's supposed to operate. So it's buy all, sell all, but it's also a levelized value. So they don't just look at the value of solar today. They look at the value of solar over the entire lifetime of that panel, 25 years, and they levelize it. And the benefit of that is you get some of the future value into the present, and it kind of raises the rate initially. And that's supposed to be a little bit of an incentive as well, at least in the early stages of investment. So we can go ahead, and that's just some facts. Austin Energy was the first utility to implement this in 2012, and then Minnesota this year became the first state. And so my question was, will it fly in Washington? So the first thing that I wanted to do was look at the Minnesota method. If we were to take Minnesota's method, bring it here to Washington and apply it, what would it look like? So there's three processes. Just go to all three of these. There's three of them there. You have to first identify what each of the value components are. So we can say, for example, there was the societal benefit, there was you are providing energy, there's all these different benefits. Quantify the economic value of that. And I'm interested in seeing your data because you've actually done that. You've quantified a social benefit. And then you calculate what the value of solar tariff is for that. So let's look at how that looks in actual numbers. So this was the first step, identifying the value components. So I've sort of classified each of the benefits of solar into four. There's the energy benefits, and within energy, Minnesota looks at avoided fuel. They look at the plant, which has variable costs and the energy loss associated with that plant and the distribution as well, and an energy hedge value. So when you have a value of solar tariff, you have a fixed rate that you're going to pay for solar for 25 years, and there's value in that. And I should have said, if you guys have questions in between, feel free to stop me. It's not a problem. And then, of course, there are capacity, generation, transmission, distribution capacity benefits. Nobody really looks at the ancillary benefits because they're difficult. Well, the technology that you would need to actually realize that value probably don't make it cost effective. So if you're looking at just residential solar, then most studies just don't ignore it. And so Minnesota is no different. They ignore that. However, they do recognize that there are societal benefits and environmental benefits to solar. So okay, you've actually given me a number for some societal benefits. It wasn't levelized and put into $1 per kilowatt hour value, but that's one process, yes.
If we had a carbon tax, where would the carbon tax be?
So that would be in the environmental benefits. So this particular methodology quantifies the environmental benefit of solar using the EPA estimated social cost of carbon. And so you assume you have this natural gas plant, you have a heat rate, you know the efficiency of it, and you can determine how much carbon you're avoiding by having solar, and you can put a price on that. Yes.
Is there any weight given to the time that the production is being made, that most utilities will have to have during high demand periods some auxiliary higher cost generating capacity to top peak loads? And is that taken into account when you're talking about a value of solar tariff?
Yes, so it does look at the hours that solar is producing and its effect on the capacity. And which is, so there's going to be a slide coming up a little bit later. That's one of the areas where Washington gets hit, because we're a winter peaking region, and then solar doesn't really reduce that one peak hour in the year. And so there's a value component here that's absolutely zero, because solar just doesn't produce at the right hour. So absolutely it does. Yes?
So I see that you have reserve capacity up here as a
Yes.
benefit.
Yes. No, so wait, Minnesota has.
So
Yeah.
Puget Sound Energy believes that the rules for Washington State require them to carry reserve capacity, like operating reserves, for all generation, including distributed solar. So it's actually a net cost here in this state, not a benefit.
Exactly. So I also view reserves as a cost. But the justification for Minnesota is they said when you reduce your load, let's say you have a 15% reserve margin. When solar reduces your overall load, you basically reduce the actual number of reserves that you need in the end. But you're saying it doesn't matter here because even the PV has to have reserves on top of it. So yes. So you've seen point number one where this methodology can't be just exactly pulled over and used in Washington State. So, so those are the different benefits. Environmental is based on EPA social cost of carbon, and societal, they recognize that it exists, but they don't have a way to quantify it just yet. And that's one of the things that I'm actually interested in looking at, is quantifying the societal benefit for solar. Oh, okay. Oh, I forgot about online.
Right. Hopefully they'll have some questions
Yeah.
too. But when we're talking about the societal benefits and reduced carbon is up there, I'm wondering if that is taking into account health or health costs?
So yeah, EPA's social cost of carbon includes health. However, it has been criticized, and even EPA itself recognizes that they haven't included all the benefits. There are still some things left out. So the estimate is low, but nobody has a better one just yet. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Those are all the different benefits of solar. So the next step is that you have to quantify what that benefit is over a 25-year period. So this is just what you're doing. You're basically looking at the discounted cost of the utility, dividing it by the discounted PV production, and then you can get the actual value of solar price. And you do this for every single value component. So what is the cost for my fuel? What is the cost for the plant variable cost? What is every value that I just talked, every benefit I talked about, we're going to have an equation that looks like this to quantify that portion of the value of solar tariff. So what I'm going to do is walk through this process for one component and then give you the results at the end, because it'll bore you to death just getting through the next two slides. So this here is the one that I don't expect anybody to be able to read, but what you have is, this is the avoided fuel costs. And what they assume is that you have that PV is offsetting natural gas, so that the marginal fuel is natural gas, which is true for that region. And so this is what the value of solar looks like. You need to have the solar weight heat rate, the actual heat rate of the actual generation on the margin. You also need to know an estimate of how much you're going to be producing. There are also some discount factors that are involved, a lot of economic stuff that goes up in there. And when you smooth it all out, when you go to the next slide, this is all the data that goes into it. But it's only that one in the middle, the red one, that's the value of solar for the fuel benefit. So what you can see is that if you were to look at the price for fuel, it actually varies between $3 and $9 over the 25-year period. And so when you discount it and then levelize it, it's 5 cents for the entire 25-year period. So you can see initially it'll be higher than the current value, and then it's lower towards the later years. But that's what the value of avoided energy fuel cost is. Repeat that for a million different benefits, and then you get the next slide. One more step. So you mentioned that there was the issue about capacity. So what they do is for each of the different components, they multiply it times a sort of capacity factor. They call them load match factors. So if it's an energy-based value, they give you 100%. If it's capacity-based, they might give you 0, they might give you 5. It just depends on how they define the capacity factor for that resource. And then, of course, you can go to the end of the slide. I just explained that right there. So this is basically what they're saying. If this is some sample data right here, if we look at the year, I know you can't see the blue and the green, but this here is the hourly load throughout the year. If we looked at the peak hours, morning peak hours, afternoon peak hours, and say, how much can solar contribute to a utility here in Washington with this kind of a winter load, winter peaking load, the capacity is like 0.0047. And that's, if we only looked at the evening peak, it would be 0. And if we look at the peak, the absolute 1 hour in the year where the utility has its highest peak, solar doesn't produce anything during the coldest night of the year. So you can already see that the capacity factors, the capacity value is going to be low. So now we can see the final result. So this is what the value of solar would be if we were to transport the Minnesota method and bring it here. How many of you think that would actually work? 9.6 cents per kilowatt hour. Does that sound reasonable? No? No. So actually, it was animated. I see you did something there. But anyway, the problem is that we don't have a capacity value. So the capacity value is not going to be there. Even though it's showing up here, we don't have one. And also the energy value, you can see the dark blue at the bottom is fuel, and the red at the top is the avoided environmental benefit. Both of those are wrong. And I believe somebody mentioned this, but I can't remember. But we're in Washington. Our marginal resource is not going to always be natural gas. So you can't value solar based on offsetting carbon 100% all the time. Yes?
The balancing factor that I see is given the effects of the change in climate and the reduction in snowpack and water availability for the hydroelectric, that's primarily the production mode for Washington State electricity, that solar provides its highest benefit during Washington summers when that water resource is going to become less available and would cut the demand for that water resource during a period when we need to cut the use of that water, and has a higher value at that time than in the winter when the projected changes would say that we are going to have even more water available through storms.
Exactly.
Not necessarily snowpack, and that need in the winter for that buffering by solar is not as high, and you could have that higher demand, during that period because you would be able to provide that with the extra water through the hydroelectric systems.
That is absolutely true, and so we've got another method that sort of modifies it and realizes that there is a capacity value. And so we look at the capacity over the entire year, not just in the winter, which is the next set of results. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. This methodology, there are some things like the discount rate that are utility specific. And so for the Minnesota example, use like 8%, the weighted average cost of capital for the discount rate. So whatever that is for the particular utility. But then there are other discount rates or other factors for like the escalation rates, things like that are state, yeah, they're for the entire state. So this is example data, but using a winter peaking load set. Yes.
It's kind of a similar question. I mean, we have such a different solar climate. We have Eastern Washington where you have a lot of sun in winter, and we have Western Washington. Here in Seattle, you don't. I mean, if you consider different climates, I think it would make a difference too.
So I should clarify that the solar data that I used was simulated data for Seattle. So yeah, that's a valid point there. Any other questions?
I just want to point out that for Seattle City Light, we don't actually get net metering. We get a weird blend because when our solar is producing, it pushes our rates down into the first tier, which is like 5 cents, and that's if we overproduce in a billing period, we get credited for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Then when we go to pull that power back out later in the year, we're usually in the second tier paying 11 cents. So 9.6 cents might not be too bad because it really is complicated. And it also depends on how much of that you're consuming at the moment that it's being produced and how much of it are you pushing back out of the grid. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. A complicated rate structure does mess things up a bit. So let's look at the issues that you addressed, the capacity, and then of course the fact that natural gas isn't always our marginal fuel. So if we assume that 50% of the time it's natural gas, the other half it's hydro, which is still too high, the value of solar dips down. Okay, and then if we assume something even more, to only 20% natural gas, the value dips even more. And so now we're starting to look at a tariff that is below what most of us are paying for our retail rate. So that might be some cause for concern. So now we're going to look at if we had used another different methodology. So let's forget the Minnesota method and let's do like you said, have a capacity factor that looks at the entire year. So here it can range anywhere from 0.1 to 0.25 depending on who's doing the guessing. But for this study, I assumed a 0.11 capacity factor. And let's say for the energy value, we're not going to mess around with fuel and things. We're just going to look at market prices. And let's assume that solar offsets market purchases or spot market purchases. And for the energy value, we have RPS requirements. So let's meet our RPS requirements. And if you happen to be a utility that takes title of RECs, you can then sell that as well. So if we add up all of that value, then it's a little bit better, but it's still slightly lower. With RECs, you have to assume what the price is. Now, obviously around here, it's next to nothing, so I assume just $1. But that can change, obviously. There are policies that can artificially inflate the value of a solar REC. And so the next slide is what happens if it went up to $50. And then, of course, you can see that you can pretty much create the value of solar depending on what the policy climate is, which is what you were basically just saying a minute ago. That's kind of the discussion that's going on right now. So is it good for Washington? By the way, how many of you have solar installed? Are you getting net energy metering in addition to production credits and all of that? How many of you would be okay with the value of solar tariff, not net metering? Yeah, that's what everyone says. It depends on what the rate is in the end. So how do you feel about net energy? If you were told that net energy metering was causing you to shift your costs to other people, would that make you say, okay, no, maybe now? You're like, nope. And the argument, okay, yes?
I'll shift the cost of my installation to them too.
I like that. And the reason why solar proponents can say that is, oh my gosh, I forgot your name. David, you recognize that there are other benefits to solar that are not yet monetized. And because they're not monetized, this isn't necessarily a fair method until we can monetize every single benefit of solar. And so that's what I'm slowly moving into right now, is looking at the role that policy can play in valuing solar. Yes.
I'll just add that there's also a question about whether or not the tariffs are taxable income or not.
So there's a way that Minnesota got around that. So because you have to sell all of your production, technically that can be considered income. What they do is you sell it at the value of solar tariff. If the amount that you sell exceeds the cost of your bill, it rolls over to the next month. It continues to roll over for a year, after which it just gets forfeit to the utility, and so it can never be considered income. That was the trade-off that both Austin and Minnesota implemented that because people had that fear. That's a very good question. So that's basically what I'm looking at. I was very interested in looking at how we can quantify the societal benefits, so I'm going to be bugging you for sure, David. But also looking at other ways that the environmental benefit can be quantified, because even the EPA itself says this estimate is too low. Yes.
My understanding of the compensation model for Puget Sound Energy is now based on how many households they serve, not necessarily how much electricity they sell off the grid. And so I was wondering how that might have an impact, and is that something that's widespread with utilities, or is that unique to Washington?
How is it possible that so that you're saying the revenue that they're allowed to collect is limited by their number of customers, regardless of what they use?
It might actually be the amount of, they have caps on the amount of income that they can have each year, so they kind of balance their budget that way. That's my understanding of it. Maybe someone here might.
Maybe somebody because I have a different understanding of how utilities recover rate. Yeah.
The utilities recover through utility tax, basically the credit for utility tax. And so they're limited to a capital on it.
Yes.
So a relatively recent change here in this state is that the Utilities and Transportation Commission is allowing utilities to decouple their recovery. So they earn a set of money that the UTC determines, and they spend a completely unrelated set of money to go and provide us with the electricity and all the other benefits that we get. That gives us a lot of very, very interesting opportunities. It allows the utility to expand their conservation program in a much more aggressive way. Previously, this actually screwed the utilities economically. So for every dollar they spent on conservation, they couldn't get their roughly 10% profit margin off of any of that money. And that's a permanent loss that grows over time. So the utilities were very, very interested in getting decoupling in here. And it actually can improve the environment as well, or it can give us the right environmental benefits if done right.
Great. All right.
One thing I could just add is that they used to have a lot of energy efficiency rebate programs that were at odds with their bottom line. And so part of the thinking there is that it's removing that conflict. But I was just wondering if that's something very unique to Washington, or is that something going on with other utilities?
No, that's all, going around several different utilities in all different regions. Yes.
Because I would think that if that started to take hold in more places, there would be less resistance possibly to,
So now you're talking about decoupling, if decoupling were to take hold?
Yeah, it seems like in your earlier slides you're showing the map of states that are trying to fight the, the net metering and things like that. So possibly if there was that concept was removed, that those forces might go away.
Right, right. And I do have a map of the utilities that are decoupling. I just don't have it on me, and I don't have it off the top of my head. So that's unfortunate. So we can sort of go ahead. So just to compare the pros and cons of having a value of solar tariff. It's good because it's fair, first of all. You're compensating solar for what it's actually worth. If you can actually get all of those different value components correct, it's more economic and sustainable than an incentive that might cease to be cost effective, but you have to keep on with it because it's a policy. And then, of course, if the value of solar, this is something that's updated every year. So when the value naturally starts to decrease, the value of solar tariff naturally decreases over time. So you don't need to set caps on solar. You don't need to do all of that. It's a natural and efficient way to price solar. However, if there aren't strong policies that are consistent in understanding what the value of solar is and defining what that value is, it's going to be too low, which you've already seen. It's extremely low. And that, by the way, was the levelized value. So even bringing some of that future value to the present, it was low. So not going to be high here if we were to do it strictly by the book. And another issue that I personally take with value of solar tariffs is that in order to calculate it, you have to have a whole bunch of assumptions, economic assumptions, discount rates, inflation rates, any one of which could throw off your analysis if you're wrong. And so I think prices, for example, have to go in there. So I think it's a little bit uncertain. There's a rate that could change with the retail rate, but also reflect the value of solar is something that I feel would be more appropriate, not just for Washington, but more appropriate in general. So with that, that is what my opinion is about solar. I think it's going to require, first of all, restructuring rates, because things like tiered rates or even flat, just having a flat rate, it does nobody any justice. So that is the value of solar. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So in the absence of a policy like this, what the utilities are going to be pushing for is raising the monthly connection charge.
Yes.
So Puget Sound Energy's economist told me yesterday that they believe the cost is $28 per month per customer to connect, and then they would lower down the actual variable cost for the electricity consumed to probably half or a third or something. How do you think that would compare with this over time?
So if you were to do it that way, that's saying these are my costs as a utility, and I'm going to make your charge be reflective of my cost 100%. And so that would be fair, but the value of solar would go down, because if the fixed cost is $28, installing a solar panel isn't going to reduce your cost to serve me. It's still going to be $28. So it's going to make the value of solar go down. So I'm an advocate of decoupling the rates, but having, for example, an energy charge, a demand charge that are different rates. One could, the energy rate would be higher than a demand charge rate. Both are variable, and then a small fixed charge. So when the utility is recovering its costs, the value of solar is reflected in those individual components and not all in one energy rate. I think they should, even the value of solar should be decoupled, I think.
So I seem to recall reading that one of the big utilities in California was considering trying to make it a requirement for solar installation that you also had to install energy storage. And I'm wondering kind of what that would do.
So that would increase the installation cost, the upfront investment, but it would certainly make the value of solar go really, really high if it were properly operated. Yes. The cost of the battery and the cost of the additional value that it would add to the, honestly, I could guess, but my guess would be probably not. My guess would be probably, unless you use that battery for something else besides smoothing out the solar. If that's the only benefit that it's providing, I don't know.
Quick question. How does it compare, or how do the summer peaking states do, say California and Texas and Florida?
Okay, so this one right here was actually the Minnesota method, and also Austin Energy. Actually, you go with Austin Energy because they've actually got 2 years of this under their belt. So as I mentioned before, the value of solar is something that's calculated every year. The first year that they did this, the value of solar, if I'm not mistaken, was like 12.7 cents, which was a little higher than the retail. The next year, it went down to 10-point-some odd cents, which was slightly below. And so even in an area that's sunny and you think that, the value would remain constant over some time, we're seeing that it goes low. But that might be utilities not wanting to value solar for what it's worth, and just, initially that's the hook, and then you sort of taper it off over time unjustly, which is why I'm not an advocate of that whole 25-year fixed value. I don't really, I'm a fan of value of solar. Like, the price of solar should not be based on the retail rate, because those are completely different products. But the value of solar as it's done currently, I think, can be improved by a lot. Yes.
Wouldn't you have a harder time selling it to residential customers if the return is variable, if they can't count on how much they're going to get back?
Not only that, so the reason for, so yes, that's true, but to get people to finance. So a lot of the advocates for having a 25-year levelized value is so that it can be more easily financed. If a bank, for example, knows, okay, you're going to get 12 cents for 25 years, and they do the numbers, and then they say, okay, I'm willing to finance that. But if they don't know if tomorrow it's going to go down to 4 cents, they might not be. So that's the biggest concern that people have. In terms of selling it to people, Minnesota has kind of avoided that because they put that in the hands of the utility. So the utility decides if they're going to do net metering or if they're going to do value of solar. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
One other thing I think that we might want to consider is that this is the issue of net metering, and I think that this is separate, to my mind, from feed-in tariffs that provide incentive payment for the installations, which is sort of like the subsidy that oil and gas companies get in order to increase production. I think that is a separate issue from the value of solar tariffs that we're talking about here. I'm not sure if you feel the same.
Not really. So when you have that value of solar tariff, for example, you're getting, if you look at the environmental value, even in this case, it's looking at the EPA estimated cost of carbon. In Minnesota, that value turned out to be like 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's something that you're paying solar that is, completely aside from the value that it would normally bring. It's sort of like an incentive. Traditional generation wouldn't get that that particular benefit. So I don't think it's separate. I think it's the value of solar tariff is saying if we're going to have an incentive, let's let the incentive be based on the value. So you have to create value where value was not there. Before, we were only looking at energy and capacity. So I can go buy energy from a hydro dam for 3 cents. If all I'm looking at is energy, then there's never going to be any value of solar. So what I'm saying is the value of solar has to take into consideration values that we're not looking at right now. So like societal benefits or better ways of capturing the environmental benefits. So it's going to come off as an incentive, but it's included in the actual tariff. And so it's more sustainable. So long as you're providing that benefit, you justly deserve that tariff. It's not something that can go away with time. Yes.
How are you evaluate? How's the meter? Was the meter running backwards slower?
So that's the way you think of net metering, that it runs backwards when you're feeding back to the grid.
Well, is it going to run back?
So this actually requires 2 meters because you have 1 meter for your solar panel and another one for your usage, and they're completely different. Yeah, but yes.
And also they figured.
It doesn't have to be a smart meter because right now you're being billed according to your. You don't have a smart meter, but you can still be billed. You have a certain amount of energy that you use at the end of the month. The same could happen with solar. You just figure out how much you've produced at the end of the month and price it.
You're going to be getting the readings from the production meter? Are they going to get it directly from the inverter, or are they going to get it from the utility meter?
Now, I do not know that. I do not know how. So they measure from the production meter, but I don't know, yeah. That much I know. It's just that they measure from the production meter.
Same meter that they figured.
I'm sorry? your tariff from. Yes, yes.
Quick question. Are there similar, so we're a bunch of, I like to call it solar crazy people, chasing solar in Washington, but are there similar tariffs proposed for other fuels, wind fuel, biomass? I worked with a company in my inverter history. They were actually generating electricity from a pellet stove. So they, on that cold December, January night, they could generate 3,000 watts in the middle of the night, you know, at 4 in the morning off a pellet stove. So those technologies are out there. Is there anything similar tariffs for similar renewable energies?
So that I know of, no, but I can tell you that when I tell people who are from utilities about the value of solar rate, the first thing that they say is, if we have a value of solar rate, then the people with wind will ask for a value of wind. The people with bio will say, what's the value of bio? And everybody's going to want a value of rate. So honestly, it would be better if you could determine a way to get the value of blah, 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 essentially. Like, but that has to do with restructuring your retail rate and understanding how each of those different resources affect utility costs, and then you can have a value of anything tariff.
The utilities all across the country are dealing with, you know, the problem of rate design. And it seems like solar is kind of the whipping boy for that process because, you know, we're somehow worse than other things. Now, I understand that if you do something with energy efficiency, then it's demand reduction, and they like that because it occurs when they want it to occur, whereas the solar production occurs whenever the sun's out, and it might not have anything to do with demand. But overall, they're all struggling with this this lopsided rate design that they have now. Seattle's got a really bad one. Tacoma's got a worse one, and so as they deal with those things anyway, is the value of solar really not a good idea because they're going to shift costs over to basic charges and demand charges and that sort of thing?
So I don't know how it would shift costs. Or you're just saying you're saying that instead of having a variable rate, you're going to then have like fixed charges as part of the rate structure?
Well, yeah. If utilities do a rate design that better reflects the reality for them. If I put in a heat pump, now I'm not buying kilowatt hours, and that really has a lopsided effect on on their balance sheet. So if they do a rate design, are we better off forgetting the idea of value of solar because we would really would not be a good deal for us?
So I'm a graduate student, and this is that's what I'm actually looking at right now. That my hypothesis is that if you properly design your retail rate, you can capture the value of distributed energy resources. And I actually have some preliminary results, but I was told I only have 30 minutes, so I cut it out of my presentation. I'm sorry about that, but I believe that there is a way that you can express the value of solar, the value of any resource in the retail rate, and a value of solar that's tied to your retail rate. And I'd be happy to share that with you at another time, but I just don't have my results with me now. But if done right, I don't believe that the rate design will have a negative impact on the value of solar, or vice versa.
So one of the comments about the net metering and how the meters are installed for production meters actually may be important because in the European system, the German system, the production meter feeds directly onto the grid side of the power, and the consumer's meter that they're pulling back off to use is also coming to the grid side. So they're not really, the production from the solar never is directly self-consumed. In the U.S., most of at least in Washington State, most of the solar installations, this PV comes into a breaker in the consumer's electric panel and the grid that's being used for about 5 to 10% of the time is their electric panel for the consumption. And the net meter, or some of the charts and stuff show, basically assume that all the power is going back to the grid and coming back. And it's not going that way. It's all staying within the premise. And that's not a big bias, 5 or 8% or 10% there, but that really isn't, that's a portion that's not being used at all by the utility. There's no capacity in there. It's reducing. It's like an energy efficiency improvement.
Oh, so, but it's reducing the consumer's load.
Yes, but at the same time, if you drop a person's load down to 10% it was by doing lots of energy efficiency improvements, rates are going to go up for everybody also. So is that fair then to say that everybody should consume a certain amount of energy because otherwise their neighbors' rates are going to go up?
I think it would be better to include that effect in the value of solar tariff. I still don't think that that's something to make a value of solar tariff not a good idea. Just if that is actually in there, adjust it for that. But any other questions? That's it. Thank you very much. It was nice talking to you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jeremy and Almaz, for your presentations, and we'll be more than happy to share the data, so just get in touch with us. And that's it for the evening. So after this, we have the hall for another half an hour, so we can all feel free to mingle and talk if we want to. And after that, we're going to be headed up to the Finney Market Pub for food, because frankly, I haven't had dinner yet. So I have room for 3 in my car, and that's about all we got. Thank you very much, folks, for coming out.